Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hey, it's Zoe, your friendly neighborhood Canadian, Australian leadership expert. And my question for you today is, how do you create places that people want to live in, be in, play in, and work in? How do you create spaces that promote highly productive teams, high-performing teams? Well, it's all about placemaking. And my guest today is was she an expert in it? Well, she's certainly an active participant in placemaking, which I hadn't heard about before I spoke to her. My guest name is Susan Davidson. She is the CEO of the Australian Diabetes Educators Association, the ADEA, which I find a very difficult acronym. So I end up saying the full name of the organization generally. And she has had some big jobs across corporate, the public service, and the private sector. Let me tell you about this. So she started off in finance, and then she moved recently into health and diabetes, which is fascinating. Before the ADEA, she was general manager of NDSS with Diabetes Australia from 2009 to 2018. So she's had a number of really interesting leadership roles. And in her spare time, this is the placemaking bit, she has been part of community building and events. And the community building agent that she's part of is called the Braddon Collective. It's a Canberra-based community group which works collaboratively with local businesses, landowners, and residents and the ACT government to maintain the diverse, inclusive, and vibrant character of the suburb of Braddon. That's the official blurb. It's all about how you bring people together to talk about the place, their places. And it could be a building, it could be a public environment. In Susan's case, it could be a room, whatever. But we can co-create spaces that help us to thrive both at work and at home. So I'm really excited to bring you Susan today. Susan is also a member of my Amplifiers group, and she's a great contributor there. And if you want to be part of a community of leaders who are doing big picture thinking, are contributing to amazing projects like Susan and the Braddon Collective, then consider joining us in Amplifiers. We have memberships for people who are based in Canberra as well as people who are not. And that is the virtual participation at the virtual option in Amplifiers. Just go to my website, zoerouth.com, click on programs, click on Amplifiers, and there's a whole bunch of information there. Or send me an email and let's have a chat, zoe@zoerouth.com. So back to the show and our interview. Let's find out more about placemaking and Susan's amazing journey. Let's do it. Well, all the way from freezing Canberra, welcome to the show, Susan Davidson.
Zoe, it's lovely to be here.
Well, I'm glad it is lovely to be here. We had a few technical hitches getting sorted for this, but I'm so glad we made this happen. I am fascinated by people's history and background as leaders because no one springs out of the womb ready to take on leadership roles. It's always an evolutionary journey. So how did you get to be CEO of the Australian Diabetes Educators Association? Did you start in the medical field, or what was your trajectory to where you are now?
No, I certainly didn't start in the medical field. I actually studied an economics degree and worked for a firm that later merged with another firm, which merged with another firm to become what's now EY. So I worked very much in business systems and finance. So that was my area of specialty, and I worked in that area. I started as a school leaver, did my studies part-time, and worked in that field for about 10 years. And my husband was offered a job in the US. So we all moved over to the US. I was in my early by this stage.
Where did you go in the US?
Washington, DC.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah, it was really lovely. We were there for a few years, and I don't know what it was, but as somehow in the moving back to Australia, I developed severe allergies, and so did one of my children. So we developed health issues, and in exploring that and wanting to know more, I'm not the type of person who just lets something go. I need to know why. So I did a lot of reading and so on, and developed a strong interest in health and disease prevention. So I went back to university and studied health science. So I did an undergraduate degree in health science. And I guess with my business background and the health science degree, I took up a role with Diabetes Australia. I became the general manager of the National Diabetes Services, and there I held that role for around 10 years. And from there, I had another CEO type role with a small think tank and moved into ADA as CEO. So it's been a journey with quite a few twists and turns.
Yeah. And that's a personal catalyst to moving into a completely different field and restarting and study. How different are the worlds of finance and healthcare? Are there any similarities?
Well, my view is that every business, every organisation has a finance and business component. Business systems are essential to businesses, so there's that element. In terms of health, health isn't always considered in business. In terms of the hours people work, the lifestyles they lead, etc. But I think they actually mesh very well together. And it's been an interesting skill set. It's not where I ever saw myself going, but it's been a really interesting journey. And I love working in the health field because you work with very passionate people. That was something that was sometimes missing in the business sector. There was more of a focus sometimes on money and status than the passion actually driving people. And that's what I love. I love the passion of this sector.
Oh, absolutely. I agree that the people I've come across who work in the health sector are dedicated completely to their work. So you said this is not where you saw yourself going. Where did you see yourself going at a younger age?
I think initially I saw myself as staying in the management consulting finance type business. Saw myself as a partner. I was on the partner trajectory. And it was only as I got older, I thought, hang on, there's more to life than money and status. And I'd like to explore that more. So I decided not to go down that pathway.
Yeah, right. And what did you discover about humans when you were in Washington? Because, they're English speakers, but it's a completely different part of the planet.
Yeah. It was really interesting, actually. We think of ourselves, we speak English, therefore we must be similar. But the cultural difference was actually quite big. And it took a little while, it took probably 12 months to really settle in and make friends over there, real friends. But there are a lot of cultural differences. And in fact, we had some hilarious moments where we had language differences as well. I remember one day saying something about it raining cats and dogs, and it created lots of laughter and questioning about why on earth would you say that? So there are expressions we have that don't make any sense over there and vice versa. So, you have to work through all of those things.
Oh, that's hilarious.
In fact, one of the funniest experiences I had was when my eldest daughter came home from school one day and she told us that the Hawk Man was coming to school. And she was very excited about it. And I said, what do you mean a Hawk Man? She said, well, he has hawks that fly. And I just thought of pigs. That's all I could think of, pigs flying. And I thought there's something a bit strange about this conversation. So the next day I went to the school and I tried to clarify with the teachers what a Hawk Man with flying hawks, which I thought were pigs, was, and found out they were hawks. HWKS. So we had lots of misunderstandings.
What is a flying hawk? Hawk. I know I have those all the time, being a Canadian living in Australia, where I mishear, or the picture of the word that people say is different in my head than what it is, because of the way Australians pronounce things, or the way that Canadians pronounce things. So I'm often like, what? I remember one of my first trips around the suburbs. I was looking for ages for Crozier Street. This is this address somebody gave me. I'm like, Crozier, Crozia, Crozier. And I could not find it anywhere until I worked out it was Crozier. Like I would have pronounced that Crozier, and the Australians pronounce it Crozier. So yeah, that was a simple example of how you can get derailed by these little things. Yeah, fascinating. I think it's always really good for the soul to get immersed in a different culture for a while and to figure out how people run the systems life, essentially. Like everything from social dynamics to business can be quite different. So this is a very interesting, two streams of your world flowing in different directions and then merging into the CEO of the Australian Diabetes Educators Association, which is the hardest acronym ever, I have to say. ADEAE. I have to say the full name because I can never get the acronym right. So in all this, what do you think what's a big success that you've had as a leader?
The big successes I've had probably would relate to some transformational projects I've been involved in. And the reasons they were big successes were the time we took to really understand the people and the impacts of the project on people, and to engage experts to, really experts in that particular project area. So one, for example, was a national helpline that was implemented. It was a 12-month project, and it was transforming locally run state and territory helplines into a national helpline in a federated model. So there was a lot of political tension. The states and territories wanted to continue to own their helpline, but the requirement was for a national helpline. And just in that sort of politically charged, federated environment, getting the stakeholders involved, really understanding the issues and bringing them along on the journey to a really successful implementation. So it's all about people to me, and getting that right up front, doing that thinking up front, and thinking about the other side, all the different people and their different potential reactions, I guess, to projects like that, and taking that into account in developing and delivering change. So, it really comes down to people. A recent other major project we've had within ADA was unification with some other diabetes organisations, with Diabetes Australia and the Australian Diabetes Society. And the same thing, bringing our members along, really communicating. We took a lot of time to communicate in multiple ways. We did live webinars. I attended lots of meetings and conferences. We put written communications out. It was all about communicating and getting feedback and really understanding people's issues and responding to those issues. And it was very successful.
That's amazing, because quite a lot of those transformation projects and mergers don't go so well, largely for the issues that you've identified in the terms of being mindful of how people might react. And in the hotline situation, I'm wondering, and you can let us know, in the federated model, people didn't want to give up control of their own hotline. And you're trying to convince them, yes, we want to go to a centralized one. They have to give up something. They have to lose something. So what was the sales pitch? Like, how did you get them to feel okay with that?
Yeah, so the negotiation was that incoming calls would all go through the helpline, but certain regular routine outbound calls would go through the helpline, but certain calls would be directed to the state and territory organisations. For example, if the caller wasn't asking a simple question, but more of a health-related question, they would actually be put through to the state and territory organisations. So they still had a role. It was just a different role. So it was a negotiation, and we took our time. We did take 12 months to work through that project and implement it with people who are experts in the helpline side of things, so that we could, have a smooth process, and they would be able to anticipate the technical sort of elements. We just had to manage the people side of it.
Yeah, because I can imagine the technical side of that. If this kind of call goes here and if that kind of call goes there, that would be complex. The other one I'm interested about is the merger situation, because having watched a few mergers from afar, and the intention is a work blending of cultures, and quite often it's not a work blending of cultures at all. It's a work domination of the other, and that one culture subsumes the other, consumes the other, so that you have one culture sort of leading the way, the other one sort of has to adapt into that. How has your merger gone?
Well, it's actually gone surprisingly well. So I should describe it. It's not quite a merger. It's more, we call it an affiliation, a structural affiliation. So we haven't merged in and lost our identity. We are still ADA. and Diabetes Australia is still Diabetes Australia. What we've done is we've created linkages at the board level. So each organisation has a director on the other's board, and we have created management level integration as well. So we haven't merged in, we still have our own identity. Diabetes Australia is a consumer-focused organisation. ADA is a health professional-focused organisation. So there have been some advisory councils set up in Diabetes Australia that advise the board. So we have a health professional advisory council now, as well as a consumer advisory council. So we're creating that dual input, you might say, at board level. And at our level, as I said, we have a Diabetes Australia director on our board. We have a lot of management level integration happening as well. And that's ongoing. The decision to unify was only made in mid-August, so it's not very long ago. So we're still going through that process, but we've already introduced group insurance arrangements. We're looking at group IT arrangements, shared services. So a lot of that, as I said, management level integration.
That's also complex. And I think what's interesting there is that maintaining identity has been the thing that's keeping it going well. And where the mergers I've seen haven't gone well, it's where there is separate identity is not a thing. You become one thing, whether it's adapting one organization's name versus the other, creating something new. Loss of identity and autonomy is the stuff that can push people over the edge. So it's interesting to hear a successful affiliation, I think was the word that you used, as a different way to do mergers or blendings or relationship stakeholder mixing. So those are big projects that have gone well, very complex ones with high stakes and lots of potential for resistance. Can you tell us about a time where things haven't gone so well, where you had a big failure?
Yeah, I can. So I would say, again, that they really relate to people management where I had failures. So I think when I was younger, I had a few, business relationships, important relationships that I didn't manage that well because I was more black and white in my thinking. Become a bit more mature since then and gained more experience. So I think managing people is really what it's about. And I can think of a particular instance in a project. I was the manager, the project manager, and it was large and complex, run for an external organisation. And it ultimately ended in a dispute with the project sponsor from the other organisation, who was threatening to sue for breach of contract.
Oh, geez.
So it really came down to managing relationships closely. We actually hadn't done anything wrong, but we were able to recover the situation we had kept meticulous records, thank goodness. So we were able to pull those out, take the emotion out of the conversation as much as possible. So you can imagine very senior people from both organisations being involved here. It was a very large contract. And those records revealed what the real issue was, which was that the sponsors' delays and constant changing of their mind on key decisions had created some issues which were being managed, except the project sponsor wanted to go live with the project before it really should have. And with this flip-flopping of decisions and so on, it went live against our advice. So we had advised not to go live. Fortunately, that was recorded. So we were able to say, look, these issues have led up to it. Let's work together to resolve the issues and make sure this is successful. So it did ultimately resolve well, but there was a lot of stress there while we were going through that discussion around, the sponsor claiming breach of contract. We were saying, no, you actually made the call against our advice, and going through those records and calmly, as I said, try to take the emotion out of it. These are just the facts of the situation. It's not always easy to do, to take the emotion out, as you can imagine, but actually end up with a successful result in the end and an acknowledgement by the sponsor that we'd actually done really good work.
Oh my goodness, that's a big turnaround. I can imagine it'd be highly stressful and highly emotional. Somebody wants to sue you, on a pretty big contract. I would be a bit panicking myself in that situation. What was the lesson or insight for you through that process?
The lesson for me was the project sponsor was quite hands-off throughout the process, didn't want to get involved in the detail, even though we kept saying there were issues. So the lesson to me there, which I've really taken on board since then, is don't worry about what they want to do. Hold them close. Hold them as close as you can and really manage that relationship so that there's that really strong understanding and trust there. So, yeah, that was it for me. It was really about people management. I could have managed that stakeholder more closely. I realised they were really standoffish and, just wanting to be the high-level director of everything, but they really didn't understand how these issues were going to play out. And I could have probably managed that more closely.
So I'm going to paraphrase and say that's about leading the relationship. So, rather than them following their lead of being standoffish and hands off and going, okay, free reign, we'll just get it done, instead of being clear and detailed about what's happening. So even if they don't necessarily ask for that or don't appear to want it, is to be the one who knows best in terms of more communication is better than less.
Yes, I think you're correct there. Leading the relationship is what it was about. Yeah, very important.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we talked about in a previous conversation, as you are an amplifier, I'm very happy to have you in the amplifiers group. And we were having a conversation about this other thing that you're involved with called placemaking, which I just found fascinating. So for those like me who hadn't come across this concept of placemaking, what is it and what do you actually do with it?
Yeah, so I really struggled with it too. And I came into that accidentally as well. Somehow I was seen as a sort of a community leader and was asked to lead a placemaking tour in my local area. And I agreed to lead this tour. And then I Googled what is placemaking. That's how I got into it. So it is a sort of a vague concept, but I would describe it as creating places that people want to live in or work in or explore. So it's not about how a place looks or the form of the place, but about its function and how it serves people. So it can be a big space or a small space. It could be a space within a building. It could be a room. It could be a block of land, a street, a neighbourhood, a suburb, a town, a city. It can be whatever size. It's about creating spaces that speak to people, that people want to be in and explore. To create those spaces, it's really got to be community driven. Whatever that community is, it's the community that occupies the room, the community that occupies the building, the community that occupies the street or the suburb or the town, etc. So it's about being community driven, inclusive and collaborative.
How do you actually get started? First of all, identifying who is in the community, and B, facilitating them to create a space or be in the space or drive the space that they want to be in.
Yeah, well, for us, we established just over 2 years ago, and we went from nothing to something. So we started off actually with raising awareness. We ran a busking festival on the streets of our local area. So we had 32 buskers. It was a competition. We got people voted for their favourite busker, buying busking coins and throwing them in a bucket. And we had judges judging those people. And we created this vibrancy and feeling of place. This was just before COVID. So we had people on the streets. There was a lot of interaction and people loved it. So we promoted our group through that. From that, we gained more members. Just even holding the busking festival really attracted a lot of people. It was a very cool idea. So we had a really vibrant, interesting mix of people of all ages from, their early 20s up to my age, which I won't disclose, but much older, and everything in between. So we created that sort of sense of something interesting is happening in this neighbourhood. It's an urban renewal area where I live, and there's been a lot of change, a lot of new apartment blocks. The density in the area has gone through the roof. It's one of the most dense urban areas in Canberra. So we created this feeling that there is a community here and that attracts more people to join. We've done resident surveys. We've invited people to join that way. We get their feedback on issues that they see or things they'd like to see happen, and we liaise with the government on those to make them happen. In fact, we've been involved in developing infrastructure upgrades in our area with the government and taking the community views to that. So we have a group of people who have very diverse interests, but a shared vision and passion. And it's been a pretty exciting journey, actually.
It does sound fascinating. So tell me about the shared vision piece. So because we talked about community, how do you find them? And you've said, well, we started by having an event and attracting people who live locally to be part of it. So that's part one. And then this idea of physical space, what are the boundaries of the community, is the next one. How do you then craft a vision for that physical space?
Yeah, so we were fortunate that the ACT government actually felt that there was a need to, in the areas that were undergoing significant development, there was a need to talk with the community and understand what was special to the community about these areas. And my area, Braddon, is one of those areas. So they actually did a lot of consultation with people in a multitude of different ways and places, and really got a sense of where the community thought the area should be going. So the community gave strong feedback that they wanted to retain what was called the gritty urban character of our area. So it's one of the few unplanned areas in Canberra, and it's a bit eclectic. You go from not so much car yards anymore. It was very much dominated by car yards in the past and mechanic businesses. Now it's a mix of different businesses, but some of them are still those, gritty, grubby, whatever you want to call them, dirty businesses. And then you've got the very trendy, somewhat eclectic nature of some of the businesses in Braddon. So it was trying to combine all of that and retain that character. And people gave feedback that they wanted music on the street, they wanted to see more artwork, but they didn't want to lose that character that it had, that rough around the edges, urban, really very urban looking character. So we've just sort of taken that and taken it further. And I think we'd have to say we're a pretty green community. I think we're one of the highest voting areas in Australia for the same-sex marriage vote. I think this area was one of the areas that voted most positively in favour of that. So, yeah, just retaining that, and we link in with other groups as well. So we link in with other community groups and try to connect groups, so to create this sense of community.
What have you learned through this process?
What's really struck me is that if you can find people or link people into the vision and the passion, it's amazing. People will go the extra mile, they'll go above and beyond. There is nothing stopping them. And I actually find when people are really engaged in that with the vision and they're really passionate about it, they sort of bounce off each other and you get these synergies. So you get even more than you thought you'd ever get out of the group. And it's really very lovely, very supportive groups. And we see the government actually being really keen to be involved with the group as well, because they can sense the positive energy coming out of the group.
That is just fascinating for me. So like a community of people steering the direction of their neighborhood flavor, which is very insightful. And there's other placemaking communities in Canberra and around Australia?
Canberra, not so much. I think we'd be seen as the leading group in Canberra. There are some others trying to establish at the moment. It really was stimulated by work being done in WA in Australia. But there are international placemaking groups. It was the international placemaking group that contacted me about the initial tour that I did that introduced me to placemaking. So, yeah, it's an international movement. There are people who are employed internationally as placemakers.
Oh, wow.
I know that I'm pretty sure there's an expert in WA. And there are some fabulous podcasts as well. I listen to them frequently because I'm really passionate about it. Great podcasts on placemaking and how people can become placemakers. Anybody can be a placemaker. It's about creating a sense of community in your area, whatever that area is. It might be a floor in an apartment block. It could be an apartment block itself, creating that sense of community in the block. But for me, it's more particularly about connecting people on the street in those public areas. That's where it's really important, creating that sense of community.
That's really cool. What are the podcasts that you listen to that you'd like to recommend?
There are two that I really enjoy. One's called Urbanista.
Urbanista.
Urbanistica, Urbanistica.
Oh, Mystica. Yeah.
The other one is called Ideal Spaces.
So cool. Ideal Spaces. Awesome. That's fabulous. There's lots of things that you've had to learn and contend with. What is something that you've had to change or overcome in your leadership journey?
I think the things I've had to overcome are more my inherent characteristics, which are I'm naturally an introvert. Even as a young child, I was an introvert. So overcoming that. And I guess seeing myself as a leader, I never saw myself as a leader. I never took leadership roles at school or anything like that. I just wasn't interested. But other people saw me as a leader. And it took me a long time to really feel comfortable being a leader because I just never envisioned myself that way. I'm impatient, so I've had to learn to be patient. And I can have perfectionist tendencies. So learning to overcome those things, which can actually be obstacles to being a leader and getting people on board. So focusing outwards on other people instead of being introverted, although I am well known for saying, no, I cannot meet with you just now. I need time by myself and a cup of tea first. So that's, just creating that way of operating that suits my nature, but also enables me to be a leader. So not denying my natural tendencies, but working with them, if you know what I mean.
That's right. Matt Church always says our deficits are actually opportunities for amplified strengths. And so, being an introvert is not something that needs to be overcome necessarily, and it has its own strengths to it. But as you say, it's learning to use those in service to a greater picture.
Exactly. Yeah. And patience can be an issue. I always want everything done now. Kind of go, and so when do you think that could be done by? And negotiate. And being a perfectionist, if you want something done now, can it actually be perfect? Or there's that tension of, so working with all of those and just trying to be a bit more people-centric in leading.
That's a lot of pressure, like not only to be perfect, but to hurry up and be perfect.
Yeah, I know.
It's a big ask.
Is to, just take it a bit more gently and not be so, I need it now and don't have any mistakes either.
How did you discover that these were obstacles or challenges, I should say? Did someone give you some feedback or did you work it out on your own?
It's a bit of both, actually. The introvert one I've worked out on my own over time. And as I said, just getting my head around the fact that everyone sees me as a leader, so I might as well be one. The impatience and perfectionism, I guess I've had responses from team members, not necessarily direct, but there'll be facial expressions or, maybe a bit of grumbling about, she's always so demanding and, somebody usually lets the cat out of the bag somewhere. So over time, I've just learnt to, I guess, and I've really tried to develop my empathy, the way I relate to my team and be a lot more empathetic. What's going on for you? That sort of thing. So I found that just achieves much better responses from people. If they think, you understand where they're coming from, you get a much better response from the team.
Learning how to do empathy or be more empathetic is something that leaders often ask about. So what were some specific things that you did to help develop empathy?
I think it's just been a journey. I read a lot. I'm really interested in how to get the best out of people. So I tend to read things like that. I've got a daughter that studied psychology, so she forced me on the path a bit further. But I think understanding, trying to be in someone else's shoes and see things from their perspective, and it plays out across life. It's important for leaders, but it's important in the way you live your life, I think. If you want to have a satisfied and happy life, I think you just have to be empathetic. I don't think you can. I can't imagine how you could be interacting well with other people without being empathetic.
Interacting, yes. Interacting well, no.
Yes, interacting well.
Yeah, that's right. So when it comes to either placemaking or leadership in general, what are some other hot tips that you might have for people listening?
One thing, I guess, that I have learned to do, and it's been a slow journey, is the concept of leaning in rather than, holding back. You can find so many wonderful opportunities and connect with amazing people if you lean in. If you hold back, those opportunities often don't come your way. And I found that's been great at work. Sometimes I thought, I'm really putting myself out there and taking things to maybe what some people would see as an extreme, but I personally think they're important. And by leaning in and getting others excited about it as well, it's very satisfying as a leader to do that. And I found that in the placemaking as well. We get some very amazing ideas coming to our group sometimes. We call ourselves a collective. So it's a very collaborative arrangement. We get some amazing ideas, and sometimes you think, oh, wow, I'm not sure how comfortable I am with that, because it's a bit beyond where I've ever been before. But by leaning in and saying, oh, could you tell me more about it, and taking the journey with that person, you can achieve some amazing things.
That's lovely. I like that. Leaning in and being curious about other humans brings out the magic. Is there a specific book? I know you mentioned your favorite podcast. Do you have a favorite book that you'd like to recommend?
Yeah, well, I can't ever go past Simon Sinek. He's one of my favorite authors, and particularly start with Why. That was a real revelatory book for me, getting people to understand the why, not just the how or the what. So that's that vision and passion piece that I was talking about earlier. And I just think that's so fundamental to everything. And understanding that, I'm not sure if it was Simon Sinek where I read it, but I think it was the law of diffusion. And, some people you will never get them to adopt something new, and other people are fast adopters. And just understanding and working with all of those groups were really essential for me. And the other one that I really enjoyed, I found a bit, maybe I read each chapter probably twice, I think, when I read it, was Navigating Polarities.
Brian Emerson wrote Navigating Polarities.
Yeah, and I really like that. And I thought about it a lot. I've used it recently at work to try to find a middle ground approach to something. We had two quite polarised views. So it was a strategic planning exercise where, we plotted the polarities, the very polarised views on the particular issue, and then worked through the middle ground and the strategies to work towards becoming that middle ground. And nobody else had used it. It's the first time I'd used it as a tool, but I found it really great. As I said, I read every chapter probably twice, thinking, but how would I use that? Where would I use that? But I have actually found that I now think more about, when I'm thinking of a problem, is this a black and white issue? Is this something I need to think about in a mind mapping sense, or is this actually polarised opinions that we need to maybe think about a different way? So I found that really useful.
Yeah, that's lovely. And we had Brian Emerson on the podcast earlier this year, and we'll make a link to his interview and a link to the book also in the show notes. Oh, I'm so delighted that you used that particular tool, because polarities is an advanced leadership thinking tool, and the ability to hold opposing views at the same time and find a third way through is part of the beauty of being able to do polarity thinking. And it's not solving problems, it's managing issues, which is where it's most suited. You don't ever solve the problem. It's just tensions that you need to manage all the time. And in leadership, there's a lot of those. Absolutely. Susan, this has been so delightful hearing about your work, your journey, your two different lives, it almost sounds like, from finance and then health, and then the blending of the two. And then this community piece of placemaking, which is just fabulous and fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing all your insight and wisdom and experience with us today.
Thanks, Zoe. It's been a pleasure being here today. I've enjoyed talking with you.
Susan is such a lovely human. I just love her energy, and I love her observations about people. and how learning about people and leaning in and finding more about them and being curious about them has been really the secret ingredient to all of her successes in all of her different roles. And it's only in this having attention out and focused on others that we can actually have the breakthroughs, whether it's saving a potential legal suit, as was her experience, or whether it's co-creating spaces that people want to live and be in long-term, such as her placemaking activities. So being curious about people is pretty crucial. And that's sort of my big takeaway from this, is being curious, staying open, and really being ignited with a vision of what we can create together as humans is pretty awesome. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have some feedback, send me an email, zoe@zoerouth.com. I love hearing from listeners. This is our last interview of the year, of the calendar year 2021. Oh my goodness. We do have a solo-sode next week where I'm going to wrap up the entire year. Dun, dun, dun. And get us ready for 2022 and what's on offer there. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.